Americans should have a White History Month. They are not wide awake. So, Rita offers her goal for, again, she's a professor, she teaches teachers. And so, training as teachers should ultimately require that they focus on their pedagogy, they, the teachers in training, is inquisitive, anti-racist, anti-oppressive, and critical. And most of all, they should seek to create a positive learning environment and experience for all of their students. She talks about how some folks, I don't want to go teach in the bad places. So you got to discuss difficult issues sometimes. Why are people, why do people who can barely speak English argue that English should be the official language of the United States? Why do we have all this stuff? Why do people who have never read the Constitution of the United States claim that they are patriots after they stab people on a train? But she wants to help teachers sort of do this within the classroom, teach folks to understand their own situations and the situations of others, and how things are not at all neutral. So teachers should embrace oppressive ideas. I think that might be a typo. Should try to fight oppressive ideas. Fight against oppression. Because my ideas of social justice are better than you. That's a joke. But just this idea that we need to make people feel somewhat uncomfortable and realize that the way they see the world might not be the way it is. Right? Particularly when it comes to like religion. All right. So common sense is stupid. Talks about that we need to get away from the idea of common sense, because common sense is always from a certain perspective. I like this quote here: learning needs to involve challenging the idea that common sense ways of thinking about the world among students and among educators are the right ways of thinking about the world. Furthermore, given the recognition that critiquing one's own worldview can be an uncomfortable process, learning needs to involve opportunities to acknowledge and work through the resistance and emotions involved in raising awareness. Also talks about the micro and the macro. Teachers should embrace. I gotta fix. I'm one of these people. I gotta fix something when there's something wrong. Must fix it immediately. Teachers should embrace discussing. Maybe that's what it is. So the micro and the macro, right? The micro is the small, understanding, everyday life, but how that is included in the macro. Macro level issues include the racial, social, class, and gender stratification that helps maintain inequality in the resources and access by learning that are provided or denied by schools. Think about the school system, right? On the micro level, we've got kids going to underfunded schools that then creates this cycle of poverty and crime and all that type of stuff. We got the prison system and all this stuff. So we have to think of the micro and the macro all at the same time and discuss these things. And then, I say Marco Polo, have guided visualizations. I say you can do this with your friends and family at home. But think about positive and negative experiences that you've had. Have you ever been discriminated against? Obviously, probably have. So, again, I am white, middle class, highly educated male. I don't get discriminated against, seriously. And I get that. So, think about, they call the transformative paradigm. think about multicultural education, which is, again, understanding how different people see the world and how they, why they do the things that they do. The end result of walking, going through this process, even though she's writing and it's a little bit vague, the end result can be transformative. For instance, a student of mine once came away from one of my courses with the following thoughts: teaching students about human rights and peace in ways that can strengthen both, give students a sense of agency. Can strengthen both. Teaching students about human rights and peace in ways that they can strengthen both gives students a sense of agency. To me, empowerment is one of the highest goals and greatest areas of potential for social studies education. Yeah. So long as they also know their stuff, though. So we have to understand things and break stereotypes. How do we, there's larger sort of philosophy here. Arts and craft. She has basically an example. So she has this larger theory stuff, and then an example, art, reflection, anti-racist dialogue, where she gives an example of a middle school teacher in language arts who uses art to do all this sort of critical literacy, critical pedagogy, multicultural education. She talks about how this teacher looks at political cartoons and how cartoons shape and frame people and issues and everything like that. And particularly she's interested, this teacher, in Islamophobia and the American confusion over Islam and Sikhism. And if you don't know the difference, go look it up. And I do actually like art stuff. If you've taken one of my face-to-face classes, I like to get the crayons out. But basically, the idea is that they think about how people are depicted, and then how we potentially sort of misconstrue that or stereotype it, and think about how what other people and other groups might see if they misconstrued us. For instance, I like this little picture. It's like what not to say to somebody, a stranger wearing a turban. Why do you wear that hat on your head? It's not a hat, it's a turban. Are you a terrorist? No. But people, they don't ask those types of questions. Maybe somebody, that's what they think. Okay. So all this stuff I think is really important, particularly the stuff on the bottom 195 when you go back. Students came to understand that the cartoon represented apathy and ignorance, and learning about someone's culture, asking meaningful and respectful questions can generate empathy and mutual understanding. This exercise also led to issues of language and framing, with the students analyzing the questions that were portrayed in the cartoon. Are there more, maybe this was the cartoon, maybe are there more respectful ways to ask similar questions? How do you tie your turban on? It's similar to a cap I might wear, so that's good stuff. So long and short of it is, using art and images and visual rhetoric to discuss issues of racism and how to fight racism, particularly in this context, Islamophobia. And so she argues we should have discussions of racism, and that people should also think about their own cultural identity and have those discussions, because oftentimes within a classroom, certain people, obviously sometimes classrooms are pretty homogeneous, but sometimes we live in, most of the time I would say, a very diverse situation, which we don't understand that person down there and seat A, B, C lives in poverty. This person over here gets discriminated against every other day or something like that. She gives the example that they learned that 80% of Sikh youths and queens are harassed on a daily basis. So you got to discuss that stuff, and then oftentimes use art and visual representation to do that as a segue to sort of have that conversation, to understand yourself and others. And so what is the big point? In this particular case, that you can come to empathize with others, even though we can never truly understand what it's like to be somebody else. Trying to empathize can work toward pro-justice and anti-oppression. That's pretty much the point. Language and anti-oppression. An unfortunate, though common statement in the classroom might look something like, Arabs are all terrorists. I would never learn their language. Why would I? So the big point here is that we need to think about issues of language and where our language comes from. So she talks about how we need to better understand the etymology of language, because oftentimes when we hear people speaking different languages, we automatically think certain things just because we're stupid. Oh, there's a little quote. Investigating the etymological origins of words can reveal the connections between peoples and cultures. And by the way, there is a really cool site about etymology. You know what? Etymology is the origin of a word. Where does it come from? Just like the example of magazine. Where does it come from? And it sort of indicates how we're all connected. And then having direct communication with someone who ain't like you is usually pretty good. And that's one of the things that she's talking about here. So really, it's just, the final words, and then I'll quit. Them are final fighting words. Big point, we need a more inclusive curriculum. We need to fight against oppression and thus hegemony. And education is itself a hegemonic process a lot of times. So basically, we're still teaching the content, but Rita argues that we should be doing all of this to teach the life lessons that move us toward fighting oppression and justice. And I do like the quote on page 199. Those committed to a more participatory curriculum understand that knowledge is socially constructed. That it is produced and disseminated by people who have particular values, interests, and biases. This is simply a fact of life, since all of us are formed by our cultures, genders, geographies, and so on. In a democratic curriculum, however, young people learn to be critical readers of their society. When confronted with some knowledge or viewpoint, they are encouraged to ask questions like, who said this? Why did they say it? Why should we believe this? And who benefits if we believe this and act upon it? Good. Those are the things that we all need to be asking ourselves. Because at the end of the day, where is it? Another quote. One of the most important tasks of critical education practice is to make possible the conditions which learners, in their interaction with one another and their teachers, engage in the experience of assuming themselves as social, historical, thinking, communicating, transformative, creative persons, dreamers of possible utopias, capable of being angry because of the capacity to love. That's sort of hokey. But in order to, this is what I'm daring you to do, just like I say, she says in the last paragraph, think outside of the box. So, in a sense, obviously the context here is, for this chapter, is a professor talking about teaching teachers to embrace this sort of critical pedagogy. But at the same time, that's what this class in part is attempting to do, but it's pretty much all about that. But education should be about life lessons and trying to make the world a better place, even in this sort of cultural milieu of anti-teaching, anti-intellectual, and saying that professors are just teaching their stupid liberal agenda. If teaching the American way is wrong, I don't want to be right.